How's it going, everyone? Nick Templin here from Templin Scouting, and I just wanted to make a quick little comment before my video starts here, because I recorded a video just yesterday talking about the Seattle expansion draft, and I do hope you guys stick around for all of that. I put a lot of work into it. But before I do that, I didn't want to post it without acknowledging the tragic news from the NHL today, which is that Columbus Blue Jackets goaltender Matis Kivlenieks passed away from a tragic fireworks accident. And it's a really tough one to talk about, because Kivlenieks was a great prospect, and obviously that's not what matters the most right now. What matters the most is he's a person, and everyone had such amazing things to say about him, and it just sucks that he's gone so soon. And I wanted to just mention that here because, like I said, I recorded my video yesterday. We do come past Kivlenieks' name in the video, and I do talk about him a little bit, so I didn't want anyone to think that I hadn't heard the news and think that I had recorded it all after the fact. So sorry for a little bit of a downer intro here, but just something that I wanted to address. Hope you guys do enjoy the rest of the video. How's it going, everyone? Nick Templin here from Templin Scouting, and today we're going to be looking at the Seattle Kraken expansion draft here and kind of make predictions on who they're going to take from each team. Before we begin, I just want to mention that it doesn't always make sense to take the best player on each team, and I will explain why as we go. But basically, in a lot of these situations, teams will likely make trades to protect these players that they don't want to lose, as well as the fact that they have to acquire a certain amount of contracts that are actually carrying over into this upcoming season, so they can't just pick a whole bunch of players that will potentially be free agents in the upcoming season. And that being said, you may not agree with all my picks, but I'm trying to go with what I do believe will be a more realistic scenario, rather than necessarily just taking the best player that is left exposed by every single team. So, getting into it, we're going to start with the Anaheim Ducks. Looking at the Ducks, there's a few places that they could go. If you have seen my Ducks off-season predictions video, that's the only one where I've actually mentioned who I do believe they're going to take in this situation. Now, before I do reveal that, there are definitely some decent options here. Obviously, Hayden Fleury is a good young 24-year-old defenseman, and so is Jacob Larson. I do think that Anaheim will have learned from their mistakes in letting Shea Theodore go to the Vegas Golden Knights, that they will try and make a trade to potentially protect both of these guys. But I do think that there's somebody here that the Anaheim Ducks will be even more interested in, and I do think that's Adam Henrique. I think Henrique is a guy that, at least for an expansion roster, is a good option to have as your first-line center. Now, I know that he hasn't been at his at the same level of play that he was at when he was with New Jersey a few years ago. But I do believe that, at 31 years of age, he's not too far up there in age. He's a guy that they would have on contract until 2024. So that's, 3 more seasons after this one, I do believe. Sorry, 2. So I guess they would have 2 full seasons of him before his contract is up. Maybe I'm wrong. It's either 2 or 3 years. And so overall, I think that he's a good starting place for this franchise. All right, moving on to Arizona. So Arizona does have a couple of guys there at the top that we could potentially look at. Again, kind of prioritizing guys who actually have contracts going into next season, because there's always the possibility that they could take a guy like Alex Goligoski, for example, and he wouldn't want to sign there and he could just walk. So having a guy that is kind of has to play for you next season, looking at guys like Tyler Pitlick or Johan Larsson, who are both guys who could potentially play on the fourth line or could be trade pieces for late round picks. So I think between the two of them, they're not too different of players. Pitlick is slightly more expensive, though. I think we'll go with Johan Larsson. I think that will make the most sense for them here. Other options, I mean, they could potentially look at Ilya Lyubushkin or Kyle Capobianco. I do like Capobianco, hard to say, and it's a mouthful, but I do think that if they start looking at Capobianco, Arizona might try and make some sort of move to prevent them from doing so, send them a draft pick or something, and tell them to pick one of these two players up here. So going forward, so obviously the name that stands out right away is David Krejci, but he's going to be a free agent, and I'm pretty sure that at 35 years of age, and obviously they'll be able to sign him to a new contract if they were able to select him, or if they did decide to select him. But I think that he'll be expensive and old, and not the best starting place for a new franchise to try and grab a player. So some of the players that stand out to me, Trent Frederick was just re-signed recently. Hasn't really shown much yet. And then Curtis Lazar, who's kind of bounced around a little bit, had a decent bounce back season, playing in Buffalo of all places. And then once he was sent to Boston, he looked pretty solid there as well. Looking at some of the options down on defense, potentially John Moore. I do like Connor Clifton for them potentially. Jeremy Lauzon. Jakobs Borrell, I think, is a guy that they could potentially look at. Looking at the goalies, Vladar is a potential option for them as well. I think they'll look defense here. I think out of all these guys, Borrell will probably be the one that they look at and say, yeah, that's the one we're going to take. He's a bit younger, was a former first-round pick, but hasn't really lived up to those expectations yet. But I think he does provide a potential bottom pairing role at the moment. Could potentially grow with more ice time and more opportunity, so we'll see. But yeah, so I'll have them taking Zboril from the Boston Bruins. Looking at the Buffalo Sabres, we have obviously it sounds kind of funny, but I do think Kyle Okposo is a potential option for them if Buffalo wants to try and make a trade to make them take Okposo's contract. That being said, I don't think that Buffalo cares that much, because they're going to be going through a full rebuild and having a little bit of cap from Kyle Okposo for at least 2 more seasons. It probably isn't the worst thing in the world. They might be able to make a trade somewhere else where they can retain salary and stuff. So overall, I don't think that they will be too interested in trying to make a deal in order to make him become the guy. Looking at some of the other options, Colin Miller, I think, actually was pretty solid considering the team that he was playing on. And looking at these guys here, they definitely don't want Cody Eakin. They don't want they might want Zemgus Girgensons, but he just came off a pretty significant injury this season. And Anders Bjork, I think that would be a guy that Buffalo does really try and protect. I think all of this is assuming that Eichel isn't gone before the expansion draft happens, which I think they will try and trade him beforehand so that they have an extra space to potentially protect Bjork, because he was the big part of the Hull trade, and to lose him for nothing would be kind of not ideal for the franchise. That would be a huge mistake. I think they'll go with Colin Miller. I think that's the most realistic situation. Looking at goalies, like Dustin Tokarski is the only one on contract next year. I don't think they would be even slightly interested in taking him. So we're going to move on to the Calgary Flames. And after I make all my selections, I'm going to put all these players into an Armchair GM and kind of set up what a potential lineup would be, and then make a few trades to get rid of some of the extra players that they select in all of this. So looking at the Flames, I don't think the Backlund will be available. And even if he is, they do have to look at his age. They do have to look at how long they're going to have him for, and kind of just think, can we get somebody better here? I do think that there will be potentially better options on defense here, and I think the guy is going to be Shillington. Now, I know I've been talking about taking guys who are actually on contract for the next season, but with restricted free agents, you kind of can almost ignore that because they have the ability to qualify him, and they wouldn't be able to lose him for nothing because if a team were to sign him, they would have to offer sheet him, and I don't think anyone's going to offer sheet Shillington, and I think Shillington would be happy to go to a new situation where he does get more playing time because in Calgary they haven't really been using him a whole lot. I think he's been dealing with injury in the early parts of his career, but he is a guy that could potentially become a pretty solid everyday NHL defenseman. So looking at the Carolina Hurricanes, this should be a pretty interesting one because obviously they can't really protect all the defensemen that they want to protect, which will leave Jake Bean exposed, which means I do expect them to potentially make a trade to try and protect Jake Bean. But it's kind of hard to say what they could potentially do here because looking at other options for the team to select, I don't think that Seattle would look at any of these other options and think it would be worth taking a first-round pick from Carolina and taking like Jesper Fast, for example, rather than taking Jake Bean. I think that they look at all their options, they see this, and they say, you know what, Jake Bean's a 23-year-old offensive defenseman. He hasn't gotten a lot of opportunity to play yet in Carolina. Because they've been so stacked defensively. But if you give him the right opportunity in Seattle to be potentially even a top pairing defenseman, because he could end up being kind of like their Shea Theodore in this draft, that could potentially turn out really, really well for them. So I think if they do leave Jake Bean unprotected, and I think they will, because I think they will have to, then, obviously... I think they jump on that opportunity to take a guy like him. So moving on to Chicago, looking at who is available there, Brett Connolly is interesting, but kind of on a bigger cap hit than what I would potentially want to have him on. Looking at some of the other guys here, Calvin DeHaan I like as a potential option. Riley Stillman even they could potentially go after. Stillman makes sense because he's not a guy that you have to feel forced to actually play in the NHL, but DeHaan also makes sense because you could take him and flip him. But I think you could also look at Colin Delia or Malcolm Subban. I don't think they're going to take either one of those guys. I think we're going to go with Riley Stillman just for now, and this is going to be one of those ones where people are like, why? They're going to wonder what the reason for that is. And I think it makes more sense to take a guy like that than a guy like DeHaan. Just because, one, the cap hit, but I mean, obviously, this isn't a team that's worried too much about cap hit going into the first year. But with Stillman, I think, you don't have to feel like you're going to have to trade everyone or some of your defensemen that you've selected right away just because they're not going to get the playing time that they would be potentially getting anywhere else. Riley Stillman is a guy who would either be a seventh defenseman or a top pairing guy in the minors, and he's a guy who I think still has the potential to become a full-time NHL defenseman, and especially being 23 years old, I think they get to kind of look at that and be kind of excited over the prospect of having a guy that young who could potentially move up. That being said, that kind of makes me think as well about guys like Brandon Hagel or even Henrik Borgstrom, who I think has gone back to Europe, and that's why his cap hit is at 0 there. So I think a guy like him would be a risk just because you don't know if he's coming back. Brandon Hagel, he was solid in the NHL this past season playing on the fourth line, but I think overall we're just going to go with Riley Stillman for the sake of this one. Looking at the guys here, so Brandon Saad, he's going to be a free agent this offseason. I think Colorado does end up re-signing him, but I think it would be risky for Seattle to try and go after him because they could claim him and he could just walk to free agency just so he could return to Colorado. Looking at other options here, there is JT Compher, who could be a potential solid third liner or fourth liner if need be. Valeri Nichushkin is available. He's a guy that I'd be kind of shocked to see Colorado let go of. He's kind of considered an analytical darling. Everyone in the analytics community really loves his play, and obviously Colorado knows that, and that's why they re-signed him after last season. I think Seattle would potentially be interested in him, but I don't think that he would either be left unprotected or left in a situation where he would be claimed without a trade. And when you look at the defensemen that are going to be left unprotected by Colorado this year, I mean, Devin Taves or Ryan Graves would be an amazing pickup. I think that between the two of them, they probably go with Ryan Graves. I think just a little bit less expensive, a little bit less term, and you know, I think Graves has kind of shown the past couple of seasons how solid he is defensively. Taves has as well, but I think you know, everything with, you know, him being a year younger, you're less on his deal, and you know, less expensive overall. I think Ryan Graves is the guy that they want. Looking at Columbus, this one's kind of tough, to be completely honest, because they really don't have to leave anyone too significant unprotected here. Obviously, seeing Nathan Gerbe go there would be awesome, because who doesn't love little Nathan Gerbe, who plays with a lot of heart at 5'4", and that's probably 5'4" with skates on. And but I mean, looking at some of the other guys here, Kevin Stenlund is actually a decent option. He'd be a guy who probably isn't an NHL ready guy at the moment, but he is 24. He is a guy who will potentially make the NHL at least at some point in his career. And then looking at all their other options, I mean, I do like Matis Kivlenieks. I guess I've never really said that name out loud, but I do know the name. He's a solid prospect goalie. And Columbus is kind of lucky that they don't have to protect both their goalies. They just have to protect, I believe, just Korpisalo. Actually, I'm not sure if it's Korpisalo or Merzlinkins that actually has to be protected, but you know, neither of them are available, so either way, it doesn't matter. We're going to go with Kevin Stenlund. I'm just kind of rambling on there. So looking at Dallas, you could go with the breakaway specialist himself, Blake Como. If anyone remembers his breakaway when he was playing for Colorado, when he turned the puck over trying to make a back pass on a breakaway. But looking at their other options here, Adam Masherin is a guy that is kind of interesting. He entered the draft twice, and so the second time around he got drafted by Dallas, and he's a guy who was pretty solid shooter in the OHL, but again, probably not the most interesting guy available here. Same can be said about Sekera. He's not very interesting, I would say. He's definitely not the player he once was. Looking down here, Anton Khudobin potentially. I did have in my off-season prediction video Anton Khudobin getting traded, so I will leave him out this time, but I do think that if he isn't traded, that it's a guy that Seattle would potentially be very interested in. So looking here, Tanner Kiro might be the guy. He's been kind of like a fourth line center when he has played. I think I like Nick Camano. He's kind of like a fourth line grinder type player. Not too different than what Vegas did when they selected William Carrier from Buffalo. And he's an RFA, so that's a guy that they can re-sign this offseason to a deal that kind of fits what they need this offseason. And he's a guy that can provide some depth right away and he's a physical player. I think he fights a significant amount, but I don't watch Dallas enough to know that for sure. So yeah, it's a decent character guy to bring in to start your franchise off with. Looking at Detroit. Now Detroit, I think there's a really interesting opportunity here. And I didn't talk about it in my Detroit video, but I think Franz Nielsen is the guy that they'll take, and you might think that that's absolutely nuts because he is on a really bad contract. He's 37 years old, right? But keep in mind, he's only on that contract for one more season after this, so they would only have to have him for one season. He helps them to potentially get to the cap floor. He's also a guy that is on contract next season. And all that being said, all on top of that, Detroit would be willing to give up probably a second-round pick, maybe a prospect or something to get rid of this contract. So that's why I have them taking Franz Nielsen, and we can kind of look into what a deal could potentially look like once we get into the Armchair GM section of this video. Actually, depending on how long this runs, I might have to do them in separate videos, but I think I will try and get them all into one video here. So moving on to Edmonton, we have James Neal is being left unprotected. I don't think that this will be a similar situation to the last where they take Neal and Edmonton makes a trade to make sure that that happens, because when we look at the defense here, actually Adam Larson and Tyson Barrie, they're both pending unrestricted free agents, so they probably wouldn't jump on that situation, but I do think they would look into Caleb Jones. So it's going to be tough for Edmonton because this is a guy they're absolutely going to want to try and protect. And if they are unable to, they will try and make a trade to make sure that he is protected. But I think Seattle will take a look at this and say, no, we just want Caleb Jones. We don't want your draft picks. We don't want, maybe if Edmonton went as far as to give up a first-round pick, but at that point, they kind of have to wonder, would that even be worth it? Can we just draft somebody else, that could potentially be better with our first-round pick this year? So overall, that's why I have them selecting Caleb Jones, who is going to be a solid NHL defenseman for years to come. So lucky Seattle that he's available there. Looking at Florida, Sam Bennett, he is a restricted free agent, but I do think that Florida will try and keep him considering how he played after they acquired him last season. Looking at some of the other guys here, I do like Marcus Nudivara, and then looking in the net, they wouldn't be able to bring in Drieger comfortably because he will be hitting free agency. So we do have to keep in mind that we haven't taken any goalies yet, and we do need 3. So that's something to try and remember as we go forward. I'm going to have them taking Marcus Nudivara. So we're getting pretty close to the minimum defenseman that they need to take. We'll be in a situation where they have more than they need and they end up trading some away for draft picks and stuff, which is a really good way to start. It's very similar to what Vegas did. Anyways, we're going to keep moving along here, going to LA next. And this one provides a really interesting opportunity. And because when you look at most of the players here, there's not really anyone who's super interesting. Like, you could take Blake Lizotte, you could take Austin Wagner, you could look at the defensemen. There's no way they're going to want to take Oli Mata unless there's a massive trade involved. Curtis McDermott, maybe. I don't think so. But then we look at Jonathan Quick, who, he's been dealing with injuries, and that it's 2 more years that they have to keep him on for. But he still can play. I mean, he's not to the level that he once was, and you might be able to find a cheaper goalie along the way who could be an actual starter. And I don't think he'd be impossible to trade either. I mean, it wouldn't be easy by any means. I discussed the possibility of trying to find a Jonathan Quick trade in my LA video, but I think that this is something that just makes more sense, not only for LA to just let this happen, but I think for Seattle, you get a good veteran goalie who, if you bring in young goalies as well, which I think makes a lot of sense as a new franchise, you get a guy who's won 2 Stanley Cups, who, in his prime was one of the best playoff goalies of all time. You get somebody there who can be a good veteran leader for your other goalies. So and it's not too different from Fleury being selected by the Golden Knights, right? But I mean, Fleury obviously didn't deal with the same kind of injury problems and the quick regression that Jonathan Quick did. But once you get past that, it is honestly not too terribly different. All right, looking here at the Minnesota Wild, and there's something here that could definitely be done, which is selecting Matt Dumba. I do think that we haven't selected enough right-handed defensemen so far, so that's definitely something to look at. Cam Talbot is a guy they could potentially look at as well. I think they're going to want to get younger at the backup goalie position, assuming Quick is their eventual starter. They're not going to take Victor Rask on. Ryan Hartman is an interesting option, but I don't think he'll be the one either. Obviously, I have Victor Rask, Nico Sturm, and a few others heading to Buffalo as part of my Eichel deal, and Eichel would be actually one of the players that they'd be protecting here. So yeah, I'm going to select Matt Dumba. It'll be interesting to see what Minnesota does with Dumba this offseason if they do try and protect him, but I think it'll be tough. I think that they would have to, because assuming in this universe they do make the trade that I am predicting them to make to acquire Jack Eichel, they're not going to have a lot of draft capital or prospects left to safely keep Matt Dumba by making a trade with Seattle. So yeah, I'm going to go with that for now. I don't feel great about this because I do think Minnesota would at least try and keep Matt Dumba, but when you look at, he's a right-handed defenseman. We haven't really selected a whole lot of right-handed defensemen yet for Seattle, and that's, everyone always talks about how important that is. Obviously, it is important. You want to have plenty of left and right-handed defensemen, but, and right-handed defensemen are much more rare to find. Anyways, I'm kind of rambling here. We'll move on to Montreal. So Montreal, there's one that actually jumped out to me immediately there, and that's Paul Byron. And that's maybe going to sound a little odd, but anyone who's been watching their playoff run this year knows how much of a force he's been on the penalty kill. He's a great skater. He's still only 32, which I'm sure many people thought he was older. Yeah, he's got a bit of a cap hit there, but again, for this new franchise starting up, not too big of a deal. It's only 2 years left on that, and you're getting a guy who can play pretty much up and down the lineup, honestly, because he does have the offensive capability to be a top 6 guy if they need him. Probably if they ran into injuries, that would be the only situation where they'd want that. But then you look at the bottom 6. He's a really solid 2-way guy. Obviously, really good on the penalty kill and such. So he's a guy that Montreal probably wouldn't even try to save, even though he's been really good for them, because they just have so many guys now that they need to keep protected, and he's just going to be an odd man out in that situation. So moving on to Nashville here, this one's going to be a tough one, I think, because you look at, so Colton Sissons is on a very long-term but low cap hit deal, so that could be really enticing, but there's a risk with that because you don't know, by 2026, so that's 5 years from now, is he still going to be an NHL player? Because you never know with these kind of more depth type players like Sissons. So looking at some of the other options, Luke Kunin, I do really like Rocco Grimaldi. That might actually be the one I go with. Looking at the goalies, I mean, it would be really interesting if they ran with a goalie tandem for 1 year of Pekka Rinne and Jonathan Quick, but again, he's a free agent. So, I mean, you can make an argument that almost makes more sense because they could sign him to whatever deal they want, make him a little bit less expensive because he's obviously not going to be earning that much money. But I do think that, personally, I'm a big fan of Rocco Grimaldi. He's a really, good skater, good offensive abilities, hasn't really had the opportunity to play up in a lineup yet. He might be kind of a guy that comes out as a big surprise, kind of like a William Karlsson or Jonathan Marchessault was with the Golden Knights. So yeah, I like that pick for Seattle. So moving on to the Devils here. I think Yanni Kokkonen is a really good option. I don't think that Sharangovich will be available. I think they would definitely try and keep him because he definitely showed flashes of being pretty spectacular last year. I mean, obviously PK Subban would be a guy that there could be a deal swung to make them take him. And to be honest, with him only having one more year on his deal, I think that's a tempting situation. But I do think that there's a pretty good option to go young here, and I think that's why Yanni Kokkonen makes a lot of sense. Looking at the New York Islanders, they're not going to take Andrew Ladd. I mean, is he on the injured reserve? I think he is, because I don't think he plays even in the minors anymore. So definitely want to avoid that. Kyle Clutterbuck, he's getting up there in age, kind of expensive for a fourth line guy. I don't think it makes a lot of sense. Casey Zizekas is a pending free agent. Komarov, kind of expensive. Zajac, pending free agent. Matt Martin, don't think so. Kiefer Bellows is a guy they could look at. He's a decent prospect. Looking at the defensive side, Scott Mayfield is pretty decent. He is a right-handed defenseman, so I do think that one is the one that makes the most sense there. Go ahead and grab Scott Mayfield, who is a very shown that he's pretty solid defensively. He kind of came into the lineup and played the role that Devin Tays played in their lineup last season. So, he's a guy that could potentially do even better with more ice time. So, moving on to the Rangers, we've got Kevin Rooney would be a really good pickup, I think, because he showed that he has a lot of offensive ability last season. He the Rangers overall, they didn't get a lot of solid depth scoring from their lineup, but I'm not thinking of Kevin Rooney. I'm thinking of Colin Blackwell. I'm totally wrong on that. I meant Colin Blackwell. And anyways, yeah, so Colin Blackwell, he kind of had a career year this year with the Rangers. I think that that's something that Seattle could potentially capitalize on, because I don't think that the Rangers are going to protect him. I think that they're either going to look at last year as a fluke, which it very well might have been, or they're going to say, we're protecting the guys that we have to protect, and he's just not one of them. So Colin Blackwell, I think he makes sense. Moving forward, we do need to keep in mind still about the goalies, and moving on to Ottawa, let me see. Yeah, so in this, they did leave Gustafsson unprotected. I don't think that's going to happen. I think Murray is going to be the goalie that gets left unprotected between the two of them. I think Gustafsson does get protected here, so we're going to pretend like Murray's here and Gustafsson isn't. So that being said, I don't think they take Murray either. He's kind of expensive for a goalie who didn't even look very good last season. They could potentially look at goalie anyways here. I do think that Joey Decord or Anton Hogberg would be a decent pickup. Looking at some of the forwards that would be potential options, Nick Paul, I think they're going to try and protect Nick Paul because he had a really solid season last season. That being said, I don't think for Seattle, for example, I don't think they would have watched enough to know how good Nick Paul was, so they might not even be interested anyways. Looking at some of the other guys here, they're not going to take Josh Brown, so I think they will go with Joey Decord. I think he's a solid option as a third goalie for the first year. Could potentially become a starter if his development goes pretty well. But yeah, he's on the younger side, so I think it makes sense. Looking at some of the others here, I don't think they want a guy like Austin Watson. Vitaly Abramov potentially could be an interesting option. He could go as part of a trade if they did leave Gustafsson unprotected to try and protect Gustafsson. So looking at the Philadelphia Flyers, JVR, it's a lot of money. I think they'll just kind of leave him be. Looking at some of the other options here, Scott Lawton, obviously, he's at a good age, good penalty killing forward and such, but I think, and I just did my video with the Philadelphia Flyers, and I kind of like the way their lineup was looking, so it's going to be kind of hard for me to kind of take them apart a little bit here. But you know, Obey Kubel is a guy they could look at. I think German Rubtsov is a good option. He's on the younger side, a restricted free agent who's still on contract this upcoming season. So that gives them another one of their mandatory contracts that they need to take on. So overall, I do think that, you know, I don't know where he's at with his development. Obviously, I haven't heard from him a whole lot the last couple of years. It looked like one year he was going to make the team as like a 20 or 21-year-old, and that didn't really end up happening. But, you know, he's a guy that I think Seattle can take a chance on. I don't think that, you know, going anywhere else you're going to get a whole lot of value other than Scott Lawton. And I think that Philadelphia will try and protect him. And I wasn't even looking at this, but having him on contract until 2026 may not be the ideal situation for Seattle. All right, so also important to note, we are over the minimum salary cap at this point, so we just have to be careful not to hit the maximum. Pittsburgh's really easy for me. It's got to be Jared McCann. I think he's super underrated. Guy's got really good hands, has a lot of offensive capability. I want to see what he can do in the top 6 of a lineup, and I do think that he'll get that opportunity to show that off in Seattle. So, yeah, we don't have to talk about anyone else here. I mean, the only other option potentially would be, I think, Casey DeSmith, but I think that they can get their goaltending from somewhere else. So moving right along, I like Rudolph Balcers as a potential option. He has shown good offensive skills, so I think that's who we're going to go with. Just moving a little bit quicker through here so this video doesn't go on way too long. Moving on to the St. Louis Blues, this could be a place where they potentially go after a goalie. Ville Husso was a backup this year. Yeah, I don't really like that for them too much. Looking at some of their other players here, Oscar Sundqvist is a good option. I like Sammy Blaze. We'll see if he is left unprotected or if they don't make any trade to try and keep him. But I do like that option for St. Louis. Tampa should be a really fun one because Tampa will likely be okay with them taking a lot. There's a lot of players here that I think they'd be okay with being taken just because they need to get their cap hit down for next season. I potentially think that they could swing a deal if they take Tyler Johnson for them. So that's a pretty good option for Seattle. Moving on, still trying to make sure we know what goalies we need. Jack Campbell will not be left unprotected. He will certainly be the goalie that gets protected. So we're just going to ignore that he's leaving there. Yeah, I don't think they're going to go after Wayne Simmons. I like Justin Holl for them. I think he's a guy that will provide some solid depth on the right side of the defense. Moving right along to Vancouver. Yeah, I don't think they're going to take the Louis Eriksson contract unless Vancouver decides to give them their first-round pick, which I think Vancouver should hold on to and use anyways. They're not going to take guys like Beagle or Roussel, so sorry Canucks fans if you're hoping for that. Looking at some of the other options here, I do like Madison Bowie as a potential option just as a depth guy in the minors. Looking at the NHL level, they could take Cole Lind potentially. We'll go with Cole Lind for now, just see how that all looks going forward. Actually, no. I like Tanner Pearson as their option because I think one of the things that's kind of been lacking through all this is potential top 6 forwards, and I think he's definitely the best option for that. Looking at Washington here, I really like Daniel Sprong as a potential option because I think he's a guy that has had offensive capabilities in the past but hasn't really gotten the chance to play a whole lot at the NHL level. It's hard to say because obviously guys like Nick Jensen and Michael Kempny would be really awesome gets for this squad. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and change my pick to Michael Kempny. I think he's a solid defensive guy that could potentially be a steal almost when you look at things analytically. Obviously, a guy like Vitek Vanacek or Phoenix Copley would also be a really good pickup goalie-wise. And depending on what we see with the Jets here, I might have to go back through and kind of look at the goalie options here. But actually, I don't think so, because I really like Mikhail Berdin. I think he has shown that he's really good at the AHL level. I think he's a guy that could potentially be the future starter in this team if his development continues to go well. Obviously, you know, guys like Logan Stanley being unprotected would be really tempting. I don't think there's any world in which the Jets let that happen, though. I think they would definitely almost make a trade involving Berdin to make that happen, so we'll keep that in mind. And then guys like Lowry, well, it's a long deal, but you know, good cap hit and stuff. But overall, I think this is just the potential highest upside move for them. So I'm going to go ahead and take all these players that I have selected, and I'm going to manually put them all into an Armchair GM, and then we will go through the lineup. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Alright, so we are back now. I have finished putting all the players that I chose from the expansion draft into the lineup here, and there's a few situations like with Detroit where I added a couple of other pieces, because obviously for Seattle to take on the contract of Franz Nielsen, they're going to need to get some things in return, so I have them getting the Edmonton second rounder that Detroit has in this upcoming draft, as well as the restricted free agent rights to Dennis Cholowski, and we're going to go through and sign some of the restricted free agents that we acquired in a moment, as well as in the LA Kings trade, or the LA Kings situation, taking Jonathan Quick. So they send a couple of third-round picks to Seattle in exchange in order to take that contract off their hands. Looking at Ottawa, for them to select Joey Decord, I had them also sending Vitaly Abramov along with him, just so that they stay away from Gustafsson, who was left unprotected. In the case of Tyler Johnson, who has a bit of a contract that most teams wouldn't want, I just had Tampa sending the RFA rights to Boris Katchouk, who is a solid prospect, should make the NHL within a couple of years or so. And overall, we're just going to kind of clean things up here, but first thing we're going to do is go through the restricted free agents that they need to sign here. So we're just going to go ahead and sign Vitaly Abramov here to just under $1 million, 850,000 there. Sign him up. Go back up. We've got Rudolph Bolsers here, who is probably going to get somewhere in the $925 range. So we'll make sure we get him in there. Going back up, I'm just going to kind of scroll through and see all the ones that we need to sign. So Jake Bean, he's probably going to get just over $1 million here. We'll go with 1.875 over. We'll start with 2 seasons. He's kind of have to try and earn more with what he's starting with, and then let's see who's next. We've got Nicholas Camano. Camano will probably make. We could probably give him less than $1 million as well, so just 900,000 there. So that's the right number of zeros there. For they could probably sign him on for 3 seasons at that. And taking a look at Cholowski, he hasn't really been a full-time NHLer, so probably going to be looking at somewhere in the 875 range. So for 2 seasons on that, I would say would be fair. Moving back up to the top here, looking at who we have next. Is there anyone else in here? Boris Katchouk. Yeah, so we'll sign him to the same deal that we just signed Cholowski to. Those guys will end up in the minors, so we'll put them down there in a second. Jani Kuokkanen, he's a guy who could potentially make the team full-time this year, so he could probably just make just over $1 million for the next 2 seasons is fine, and he could potentially make more after that. Looking at Shillington, Shillington will probably make, for now, we'll probably just go under $1 million for him. Let's just see. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. For 1 year, and then if he kind of improves on that deal, or on you know, if he shows improvement this season, he could definitely get himself somewhere in the 3 million range afterwards. Looking through the rest of them, let's see if there's anyone left that we also had to. Nope, so that's it. Awesome. So now we get to do some cleaning up of the lineup. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sort these defensemen out because they put them all on the left side. So we're going to start by putting Dumba. He's the #1 right-handed defenseman. Colin Miller will likely go at the #2 spot, and then Nudavara. Actually, I think we'll go Justin Hall. We might try and move Nudavara or Colin Miller potentially. On the left side, we're going to have Ryan Graves be the #1, Caleb Jones as the #3, but then I also want Jake Bean making this lineup. So then we're going to go ahead and put some of these guys just down in the minors here. So we're going to go Riley Stillman down there. We're going to go Scott Mayfield. Ooh, that's a tough one. I kind of want him in the lineup too. But these are some guys that they might be able to just deal away again. So, yeah, it's tough to kind of make the decisions with all of this because obviously you want a lot of these guys to get their opportunity to play, to show, you know, that they were worth taking. But I hate to say it because Caleb Jones is definitely an NHL ready guy, but because of the deal he's on and everything, they could probably afford to put him in the minors for the time being at least. Scott Mayfield, they might try and trade. We'll put Zboril in the minors as well. So yeah, let's try and find some trades for some of these defensemen just to kind of get this all cleaned up here. So find a place, and I think this is already a great place for Nudavara is the Winnipeg Jets. So they can acquire potentially prospect in return. Definitely going to want a pick or two. In fact, they can help them out and acquire Brian Little's contract and throw it on the long-term injured reserve. So let's start with that. Then we'll also grab somebody potentially who's in the minors for them. We can grab Simon Lundmark from them. And then a 2022... Not second. That's a bit of a... well, to get rid of the Brian Little contract, I'd say that's fair. So we'll do that. So they'll acquire those pieces. We'll take Brian Little and put him on the long-term injured reserve. That frees up some space for Winnipeg to potentially put anyone else they might want on that long-term injured reserve there. And, you know, it gives Seattle another draft pick in the upcoming years. So... taking a look at some of these other guys here, Scott Mayfield, we will go ahead and look for a deal to send him somewhere. And I think Toronto might actually be a good spot for him to end up. So we will, I mean, draft pick wise, it's going to be hard to make a deal with Toronto, but we could try and acquire Mac Hollowell, and it's hard to say. Probably get another prospect in this as well. Like, let's take a look who's here. Could take, potentially Joseph Wool, but I don't know if they're still kind of, whether or not they prefer Scott or Wool, but I think I'll go with Joseph Wool here, and then just throw in like a 6th round pick, and then can go ahead and put, I guess they'll have to sign Wool, but I won't do it for the sake of this. Just keep in mind that I did acquire him. So these guys will go down to the minors here, just because I'm going to clean that all up there. Michael Kempney, that's tough because he's really good analytically. I kind of, if I were them, would like to keep him potentially. But I do think that they could get, you know, pretty good value for him. So to look at, you know, a team that kind of, because of injury, had next to no depth last year at defense, they can potentially acquire a 2nd round pick for Michael Kempney, sending him to Nashville. And then Dennis Cholowski, we'll throw him in the minors as well, just for now. So Then we can kind of bring one of them up. So we'll go with Caleb Jones as kind of our healthy scratch. Between him and Shellington, they'll probably be in and out of the lineup a little bit. But I'm definitely liking the way that that's starting to look. Taking guys like Kachuk, I'm just going to put them in the minors for now. Same with Abramov. And let's see who else is here that we'd probably put in the minors. We'll put Rudolph Balsers down in the minors. Center-wise, I guess we'll go... we'll put Franz Nielsen as a scratch. I think they'll keep him in the NHL, but I think that they probably won't play him if they don't have to. Rubtsov we'll put in the minors here. And then looking at the lineup, that's kind of what we'd be looking at. Let's just kind of fix the placement of all these guys. So we're going to go Tanner Pearson as the top line left winger. Looking at some of the other guys here, I think Jared McCann would probably play center. He can be the second, or no, we'll go with Tyler Johnson as the center there. We'll go Jared McCann, second line left wing. Can go Blaze as the second line, or we need somebody on the first line there. Let's go with Rocco Grimaldi just for now. Go with Yanni Kokkonen on that side. Move Blackwell up over Larson. Larson can be on the fourth line, and there we go. There we go. That's kind of what we could be looking at this year. We can go ahead and bring one of these guys back, or we could sign a free agent or two potentially. Just kind of look what's out there. So let's take a look at some of the free agents here, some of the top point guys that will be available, potentially who they could bring into this lineup. A guy like Zach Hyman would be a really good get, I think, for them. I think Matthias Janmark could be potentially an interesting one too. Paul Stastny is a bit old. They could look at Venberg. Palmieri maybe. Be interesting to see. Yeah, let's see. Let's go with Kyle Palmieri for them. They can kind of give him a bit of a pay raise. They got a lot of cap space right now, so we can go at about $5.5 million. Let's just see. 1, 2, 3. There we go. And on, let's say 3 years for that. Bring him in. Throw him up on your top line. And then Kamano ends up, actually we'll make Stenlund our odd man out here on the scratch side and go with that. So overall, kind of looking at this lineup, sure, it's probably not, it's a little bit on the weaker side, but I mean, that's what we all thought when we looked at Vegas the first year too, right? So I mean, anything can happen. You got a lot of guys here with a lot of solid NHL and playoff experience, like Adam Henrique, Tyler Johnson, who is one game away at the time of recording this from being a two-time NHL Stanley Cup champion. So you got Tanner Pearson, who won, I think, twice with the Kings, but definitely won one for sure. I got Henrique, who went to the finals with the Devils. And then outside of that, you just got a whole lot of skill. And guys like Jared McCann, great hands, great passer. Grimaldi, lots of speed, decent shot, lots of speed from Byron. Just guys who are solid in both ends of the ice as well. And, with the right coach in this situation. And I believe they did name their coach. I think it was Dave Hackstall they ended up naming as the coach. So we'll see how he kind of does with whatever lineup he is given. But looking at all this, I do think that there's, reason to potentially be optimistic. I think that they have to go in with very different expectations than based off of what Vegas did. They have to not expect that that's how their first year is going to turn out, because when you look at all this, I mean, yeah, Vegas's roster probably looked kind of similar to this at the time that they started, but I think a lot of teams learned from their mistakes in some of the players that they gave up and some of the trades they made to allow those players to be given up in the last expansion draft with Vegas. So I think teams are going to be a little bit smarter this time about who they let go of and, who's left unprotected just in general, and I think a lot more teams will try and make trades to protect the players they couldn't protect otherwise. But overall, I think, between, they're starting to accumulate some picks, which are going to really help them out. I wouldn't be surprised to see them try and move, somebody in this lineup and try and get a first-round pick, or, package some of these second-round picks to get some more first-round picks, because we know Vegas had multiple first-round picks in their first year. That really helped them get off the ground in drafting guys like Cody Glass, Eric Brandstrom, and Nick Suzuki. The latter of two were both traded to acquire players like Pacioretty and Mark Stone, respectively. So actually, other way around, it was Brandstrom was used to get Stone, and Suzuki was used to get Pacioretty. But that could be potentially something we see. But at the same time, I think Seattle fans, when Seattle fans do become a thing, I haven't really met or heard from any just yet, but I think they have to kind of limit their expectations a little bit. I think that to expect to have the same kind of success right off the bat that Vegas had is just unrealistic. But at the same time, I mean, you look at this roster; they're going to be competitive. I think, they won't come last in the league, that's for sure. I think that front to back, that's really solid depth-wise, and they've made a lot of good moves in this scenario where they would be able to, they have a future as well. They've got decent prospects like Hollowell, Zboril could potentially still be something. Guys in the minors like Bolsters and Abramov, who still have a lot of offensive upside that could potentially make it to the NHL and really show that off. Boris Katchouk, who I do expect to be like a penalty killer type player in the future. German Rubtsov, who still has some potential there. They've got a goalie in Mikhail Berdin, who has been incredibly good in the minors, and I expect to be a starting goalie at some point in his career. So, there's a lot to be optimistic about here, and I don't want to continue repeating myself, but I do want to continue to reiterate that, they got to just level out their expectations and not expect to be Vegas in year one. They could be Vegas by year 4 or 5. They could be that good, like a few years in, using all the draft picks that they get. Starting off with the second overall pick is a really good start. In fact, we could go ahead and even add the player that I do think that they're going to take with that pick, which is Owen Power. Now, a lot of people think that he's going number 1 overall to Buffalo. There are reports that Buffalo hasn't even reached out to talk to him, so that can tell you kind of all you need to know about that. I think, is he lefty or righty? I don't know. I think he's righty. I'll just go with that for now. So he's a guy that, honestly, if I was them too, I'd almost even let him take the year off, go back to Michigan, and just really, develop. And then by the time he makes the team, he's that complete defenseman that they need right off the bat. Whereas I think if they take him and put him in year 1, there might be a bit of a learning curve there. So for now, I'm just going to put him down here. We'll just act like maybe they didn't sign him, but I did want to mention him as a potential guy who could be in the roster as well. So anyways, I want to know in the comments down below what you think of my picks for the 2021 inaugural Seattle Kraken lineup. If you disagree with me, make sure to let me know down in the comments below. You guys are always good to do that, and I'm happy to hear any of your thoughts and predictions as well, because who knows, maybe I'm wrong, maybe you guys are going to get it right, and we can come back to those comments in a couple weeks time and say, wow, you really got that one right, which is always fun. So and also, if you like the video, make sure to give it a like and consider subscribing if you want more hockey content like this in the future.